All right, guys, we're back again with some more things to consider when we're starting to get into gardening. Remember, we're starting early. That means we're starting before our actual growing season. And we're considering, we're thinking about the things that we need to have in place. So we're answering some questions um, that really come up that will allow us to be as successful as we can be when we start off our gardening. So, in this is we're going to get a little bit more technical with this. One of the things you need to consider when you're growing is your what zone you are in. Okay, zone. If you watch any of my videos, sometimes I said you may have heard me say I'm in zone 7. Your zone is it's called hardiness zone, and really it's determined by your what they call a frost date. Okay, a frost date is when it's cold outside, temperatures can drop and it can actually put frost down and harden the ground up. Right, when that happens, that can kill off almost every vegetable growing that you would try to grow. Right. So there's a certain time period depending on where you are, and for our conversation today, I'm in the United States. So for where you are in the United States, depending on where you are, that frost date can happen at various times. And what it basically is saying is when is the last date? What day are you safe to be able to grow? Like over time, we've realized that nobody really gets frost after this date, basically. So the last day that they determine will be your last frost date, and what they're saying is anytime after that, you are pretty much safe to be able to grow. And because the different climates within the United States, we're broken up into zones, and those individual zones, the larger the number zone you are, or the higher the number of zone you are, the earlier your frost date is. So, for example, I'm in zone 7, so our frost date goes well into May, which means at any point in time we could have a random occurrence where the temperature will drop. That's why many times in our area, it's always been like unheard of, or just a rule that people will mainly start gardening like hardcore after Mother's Day. It's because Mother's Day is in May, and it's like anytime after Mother's Day, we're nowhere good. I start gardening outside. You'll see me planting things not in May, but in April, because certain vegetables can handle colder temperatures or whatever. But I don't put everything I have out there as well, because if I do get that, if a late frost comes in April, it could possibly kill things. So I don't. So let's say if I'm going to be doing some lettuce, because lettuce is one of those cold kind of vegetables thing. It can handle the cold, and I start my stuff by seed. I get them growing a little bit till they get a certain size, and then in April I normally will throw them out in the yard. I will not put everything out there, because that one random time it comes, it could possibly kill everything, and I don't want to have to start off from scratch. But that's something that you would need to determine. What zone are you in? Because your zone actually determines what kinds of vegetables you can actually grow successfully. So, for example, if you lived in Florida, you're going to have your frost date is going to be, very early in the year, because your temperatures rise pretty high very early in Florida. So you uh, but that also limits the type of, because of that type of climate, it limits the type of vegetables you may be able to grow successfully. So you might have to do some crazy methods in order to grow certain things that I can grow easy. So, for example, we talked about lettuce. Lettuce likes cold weather. If you're in Florida, you have a very, very, very short time to actually grow lettuce. And if you do grow lettuce later, you have to do some other kind of method. You have to screen it from the sun. You have to maybe grow inside your house, or you may have to do some other things to get around growing lettuce because it gets so warm. However, for example, tomatoes love warm weather. They need sun. They need everything like that. You have a longer growing season to grow tomatoes than I do because I can't put tomatoes out until uh, after Mother's Day in May. That's when I can get my tomatoes growing. So I won't even start receiving tomatoes until um, late June, early July, when you could have already been growing your tomatoes because they like the warmer climate. So those are some things you need to consider, and I'll put a link down where you can find out what growing zone you're in, and then you should find out what vegetables. Once you have your zone, you could just do a Google search and say what vegetables grow best in zone 7, right? And then you can figure out what type of things that you want to grow. So your zone is very important. So we learned about zone. We learned about your frost date. That's how your zone is determined. And we said all of that is necessary because that's going to help you to determine what things you can grow successfully. All right, and lastly, we're going to talk about you need to know something to consider is you need to know what exactly you want to grow. Okay, so you might want to do this in a reverse order than what I've just given you. So you say, hey, I want to grow. How do I determine what I want to grow first? First of all, what do you like to eat? I don't like eggplant. So I don't waste time growing eggplants. Now, when I first started, I did grow eggplants just because I wanted to say that I grew them. But after a while, it's like, what's the point, right? You want to grow what you like to eat, or you want to grow what you think you might like to eat, and it might be something that you want to consider. That's what you want to grow. You like string beans? Say, look, I'm going to grow me some string beans, right? I like tomatoes. I'm going to grow me some tomatoes. I like lettuce. Those are the things you want to figure out what it is that you want to grow. And when you do that, you have to also know you want to do that because you want to know how to grow that. Tomatoes and lettuce, they need different things, so I can't grow them the same way. So if you say I want to grow tomatoes, you need to learn how to grow tomatoes. You need to know what environment tomatoes need to grow in. You need to know what weather, how much water they like. Those are the things, the fertilizers, what kind do they like? Uh, those are the things that you need to know beforehand. But also, like I said, it's kind of in reverse because once you figure out your list of what you want to eat, you do have to determine, you have to run that by your zone. Because if you're like, look, all I want to do is grow lettuce, but I'm in Florida, you're going to probably have to do a different method of growing, or that's going to determine how you're actually going to grow because where you live is not conducive for that type of growing. Or you may have to find a type of lettuce that grows better in warm weather than in other types of weathers. All right, so we'll talk about that later when we talk about seeds and stuff like that, about different types of vegetables. You also need to know when you're growing them how much spacing they need. You can a tomato and lettuce, I can grow lettuce closer together than I can grow tomatoes. Tomatoes grow big; they need more space around them. So that's going to be. So when you're figuring out what kind of gardening you're going to do, you're going to need to know what kind of spacing these individual plants need. So, for example, we said we're going to do container gardening. If you were just growing lettuce, you could use small pots. But if you're growing a tomato, you're going to probably have to buy the bigger pot because the tomato requires more. These are the things that you need to know. Also, some vegetables, when you're growing them, I like to call it a ease of growing versus the cost method. All right, and also, so say for example, I'm gonna give you one thing for me: celery. Celery is one of the vegetables that I actually eat, I actually love, but I have yet to have real success growing celery. So I would consider celery one of the hardest vegetables to grow. So let's say I have a small space. Now I can sit there and say, you know what, I'm not going to let this celery take me down. I'm going to do everything I can to grow this celery. But when I look at the ease of growing celery versus the cost of celery, when you go into a market, celery is relatively inexpensive. I mean, for $1 and some change, you can get a big thing of celery. Even if you're going organic celery, if you say I'm going to buy some organic celery, that is not very expensive. So for me, wrecking my brain and wasting space trying to grow this hard to grow vegetable in this little bit of space that I have, why would I waste my time? Right? So I wouldn't waste my time growing celery. And I don't waste my time growing celery. That's one of the things that maybe one day I'll try it again, but I do not waste my time growing celery. If I only have a limited amount of space, I want to be able to grow the easiest things that give me the best yields for my space. And I also want to consider, if something is harder to grow, how much does it actually cost for me to go in the store? Another thing, onions. Onions aren't terribly hard to grow, but they can get a little difficult in your growing of onions. But literally, you can go to the store and buy a bag of onions relatively cheap. So would I waste that amount of time doing that? No. So these are things, like I said, how do you know how hard it is to grow celery? How do you know how hard it is to grow onions? These are the things you need. That's why I say start early, because then you can figure these things out. So let's recap. I would probably reverse the order. Figure out what you want to grow first, right? Just a list of vegetables that you want to grow. Then you need to figure out your zone. And in your particular zone, you want to know, out of all these things that I want to grow, what grows best in my zone? Or what is easiest to grow in my zone? And then from there, you look at, okay, now what are the hardest things it is for me to grow out of these vegetables? Is it very difficult to grow? If not, those are the ones you want to keep, those easy to grow vegetables. All right. So all of this goes into our planning phase. These are all things that we need to consider before we jump out there and get growing. All right. I hope this video was very helpful to you. I'm going to put a link below for you to figure out what your zone is. And also, let me show you guys something. One more thing about the zone. We'll talk about this more when we go into our actual seeds. But here's the back of a pack of one of the seeds. And many seeds that you buy, it'll have these picture of the United States colored shaded regions. Those are your zones. And this is telling you when it's best to grow them in these particular zones. All right? So that's why it's important. All right. Hope you guys got something out of this video. Let's get growing.